Sophie had always been someone who believed in the good in people. But life hadn't been easy for her. As a single mom, juggling between work and taking care of her young daughter, she had to make countless sacrifices. Every day was a balancing act, one mistake away from everything falling apart. Her job as a receptionist at a small office didn't pay enough to cover all the bills, but it was all she had. One chilly morning, as Sophie hurried to get to work, she bumped into a man outside the building. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and carried himself with an air of confidence that felt almost condescending. He seemed to be in a rush, barely giving her a glance before muttering a quick apology and moving on. That was David. He worked at the same office as Sophie, but in a much higher position, senior manager. Sophie had seen him around before. He wasn't unfriendly, but there was something about him that made her feel like he thought he was above everyone else. Still, Sophie never paid him much attention. She was too focused on making sure her daughter had everything she needed, even if it meant sacrificing her own well-being. Later that day, Sophie was swamped with work. She had just finished answering a series of calls when a frantic email popped up on her screen. A document was missing, one that she was certain she had sent the night before. Panicked, she checked every folder and file, but it was gone. Her heart sank. If she couldn't find it, she might lose her job. Frustrated, she went to David's office to ask for his help. She needed to find the file, and she needed it fast. She hesitated outside his door, wondering if it was even worth asking. But she didn't have any other choice. She knocked lightly, and his voice called out, "Come in." Sophie entered, trying her best to stay composed. David looked up from his desk, barely acknowledging her presence before going back to his computer. "Mr. Harper," she said, trying to hide the desperation in her voice. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I can't find the file I sent over last night. I've looked everywhere, and I was hoping you might have some idea where it might be." David didn't even look up this time. "Sophie," he said, sounding almost annoyed, "you're supposed to keep track of your own documents. That's your job." Sophie swallowed hard. She wanted to explain how much she had on her plate, how difficult it was to keep everything organized while also caring for her daughter. But she knew it wouldn't make a difference. David's cold tone made it clear that he didn't care. "I'm sorry," she muttered, backing out of the room, her cheeks burning. She wasn't sure whether it was from embarrassment or anger. Either way, she felt small in that moment. Days passed, and Sophie struggled to find the missing document. She spent late nights at home, searching through old emails and files, but nothing turned up. She felt overwhelmed, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her. Her daughter Lily noticed the stress, but Sophie kept up the facade of everything being fine. She couldn't afford to let her little girl see how much she was falling apart. One afternoon, after another long shift at work, Sophie collapsed on her couch, exhausted. Her phone buzzed with a message from the school. Lily had been sent home early due to a fever. Panic surged through Sophie. She rushed to pick her daughter up, her mind racing with worries about Lily's health and the growing pile of work she still had to do. The next morning, Sophie barely made it to work. Her daughter had been sick, and Sophie hadn't had the energy to get much rest. As she walked into the office, she saw David talking to a group of colleagues by the coffee machine. He was laughing, clearly enjoying himself. He seemed so far removed from her struggles. Sophie sat down at her desk, trying to keep her head down and focus on her work. She couldn't afford to be distracted. But then, a thought hit her. The missing document, the file had to be in the system somewhere. If she could just get the help she needed, maybe she could find it. Determined, Sophie typed out a quick email to David, asking if he could lend a hand in locating it. She hit send, praying he wouldn't ignore her again. To her surprise, David's response came quickly. "I'll help you, but you need to be more organized next time. I don't have time to clean up after you." Sophie felt a sting of humiliation but ignored it, knowing this was her only shot at saving her job. She quickly gathered the necessary details, trying to focus on the task at hand. She could feel David's eyes on her as she worked, his judgment palpable from across the room. When David finally came over, he stood behind her while she navigated through the files. She tried not to show how uncomfortable she was with his presence. After a few moments, David cleared his throat. "See? You missed it," he said, in a tone that seemed to mock her. He clicked on a file, and there it was. The document she had been searching for. Sophie's heart sank. It wasn't the first time David had shown little regard for her, but it stung nonetheless. She thanked him quietly, and he nodded without offering a word of encouragement, then turned and walked back to his office. But as Sophie sat back down at her desk, she realized something. She had found the document, yes, but at what cost? She had been belittled in front of the office, and it felt like she was constantly being judged. Still, she couldn't afford to let it break her. For Lily's sake, Sophie needed to push through. But the thought of David and his dismissive attitude lingered in her mind. Weeks went by, and Sophie continued to struggle. Every day was a battle, both at work and at home. Lily's health seemed to improve, but Sophie couldn't shake the exhaustion that was taking over her life. At work, it felt like she was invisible. No matter how hard she worked, no one ever seemed to notice. And David? He was as cold as ever, treating her with barely concealed disdain. Then one day, everything changed. Sophie was sitting at her desk, going over some reports when she received an email from HR. She opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. The subject line was simple: meeting request. The email stated that HR wanted to meet with her in the afternoon to discuss an important matter. Sophie's mind raced. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if her work had finally caught up with her. Was this the moment she'd lose her job? She tried to push the fear aside, focusing on her responsibilities. But, as the day wore on, the dread continued to grow. By the time afternoon arrived, Sophie felt like she couldn't breathe. Her hands shook as she made her way to the HR office. When she entered the room, she was greeted by two faces she barely knew. Both of them were smiling, which only made Sophie more nervous. One of them, a woman named Jessica, spoke first. "Sophie, thank you for coming in," Jessica said warmly. "We've been reviewing your work, and we've noticed something remarkable." Sophie blinked, unsure of what she was hearing. "Unapabe?" What did they mean? "We've decided to offer you a promotion," the other person, a man named Mark, continued. "We believe you have great potential, and we want to give you more responsibility. You'll be stepping into a managerial role, overseeing some of our most important clients." Sophie's mind went blank. A promotion? It felt like a dream. She could barely believe it. For a moment, all the exhaustion and frustration seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of disbelief. "But what about David?" Sophie finally asked, her voice hesitant. David was the senior manager, and she couldn't understand how she, someone who had struggled so much, could be considered for a position that was far beyond her reach. Jessica smiled. "We've had some concerns about David's performance recently. We think you'd be a better fit for the role, Sophie. You're hardworking, reliable, and you've shown tremendous growth. It's time we recognize that." Sophie could hardly process the words. Her heart raced as she sat there, staring at the two of them. This wasn't just any promotion. It was a chance to prove herself, a chance to build a better life for her and Lily. And yet, part of her still couldn't shake the disbelief. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why not someone with more experience?" Mark shrugged. "Sometimes it's not just about experience, it's about who you are, and you've shown us you have what it takes." As Sophie left the HR office, her mind was spinning. She had been handed an opportunity she never imagined she would have, but it wasn't just the promotion that was on her mind. It was the way her life was about to change. The next few days passed in a blur. Sophie could barely believe what had happened. A promotion? Her? It seemed too good to be true. She couldn't stop thinking about it, especially about what it meant for her future. For Lily. She had worked so hard for so long just trying to survive, but now she had a chance to finally thrive. But the reality of her new role hit her hard. As soon as she walked into her new office, Sophie was met with a mix of excitement and nerves. There was so much to learn, so many new challenges to face. She spent hours studying reports, meeting with clients, and trying to prove that she was worthy of the position. It wasn't easy, but Sophie didn't back down. She couldn't afford to. Then, one morning, just as Sophie was getting settled into her new routine, she received an unexpected knock on her door. It was David. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his tone colder than usual. Sophie looked up, surprised. She wasn't sure what to expect from him anymore. Since the promotion, their interactions had been minimal, but now he was standing in her office waiting for her response. "Sure," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. David stepped inside, his posture stiff and tense. Sophie noticed that his usual confident air was gone, replaced by something almost vulnerable. It caught her off guard. "I know things have changed," David started, avoiding her eyes. "I just wanted to say, congratulations on your promotion." Sophie raised an eyebrow. The last time they had spoken, he hadn't seemed too thrilled by her presence. She wasn't sure what to make of this sudden politeness. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "I appreciate it." David nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked around her office as if he was trying to find the right words. "I didn't expect this. I didn't think you'd be the one to get ahead." His voice softened, and for a moment, Sophie could almost hear the regret in his words. "But I was wrong." Sophie's heart tightened. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself to people like David, people who never believed in her. Now, to hear him admit he had been wrong, it stirred something deep inside her. But she couldn't let it distract her. She was here because she deserved it. She wasn't going to let his past behavior shake her confidence now. "I understand," Sophie said calmly, "but I've worked really hard to get here. I didn't get this position because I was lucky. I earned it." David looked down, his shoulders slumping. For the first time, Sophie saw him in a different light, not as the arrogant, low, untouchable manager, but as someone who had underestimated her, and now had to face the consequences of it. "I can see that," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have dismissed you the way I did. You've proven me wrong." There was an awkward silence, and Sophie wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't every day that someone like David, someone who had looked down on her, admitted their mistake. But Sophie didn't need his apology. She had already moved beyond it. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm. "But I don't need your approval. I'm here to do my job, and I'm going to do it well." David nodded, his face unreadable. After a long moment, he turned and walked out, leaving Sophie standing there, processing the strange, uncomfortable exchange. It felt like a victory, but also a reminder of everything she had fought for. David had underestimated her, but now she was in control. And though it stung, Sophie knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. She had become the one in charge. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Sophie. As she settled into her new role, the responsibilities piled on. Managing clients, overseeing projects, and handling staff. It was a lot to juggle, but Sophie took it all in stride. She had to. Her daughter Lily was counting on her, and Sophie couldn't afford to fail. Despite the stress, Sophie found herself growing more confident. She was doing things she never thought possible. She spoke up in meetings, made tough decisions, and earned the respect of her colleagues. Some were surprised by how quickly she had adapted, while others had doubts. But Sophie didn't care. She knew she was capable, and that was enough. But as time went on, Sophie began to notice something. David had changed. The man who once barely acknowledged her now seemed to be watching her every move. He would hover around her office, ask her about her plans for certain projects, and even compliment her work. At first, Sophie didn't think much of it. She assumed it was just him trying to make peace. Then one afternoon, as Sophie was preparing for a big presentation, she overheard a conversation between David and one of the senior executives. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "I can't believe she's in charge now." David's voice was low, almost bitter. "I used to run this place. I deserve that promotion. Not her." Sophie froze, her heart racing. She had known David wasn't exactly thrilled about her success, but hearing those words, hearing how resentful he was, felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about his pride, his ego, and Sophie realized he wasn't done trying to undermine her. She stood there for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It was one thing to rise above the judgment of others, but this was different. David had made it clear he wasn't going to let her succeed without a fight. Sophie knew she couldn't let this slide. She had worked too hard, fought too long for this moment. She wouldn't let David's bitterness take away her hard-earned place. The next morning, Sophie requested a meeting with the CEO. She knew it would be risky, but it was the only way to make sure David wouldn't sabotage her. As she entered the CEO's office, she kept her head high, her voice steady. "I'm concerned about the dynamic in the office," Sophie began, her tone calm but firm. "I've noticed that David is not supportive of the changes that have been made, and I fear it's affecting the team." The CEO, a woman named Rebecca, listened attentively, her expression neutral. "Go on," Sophie continued, telling Rebecca about the way David had acted, his resentment, his attempts to undermine her confidence, and his bitterness toward her promotion. She didn't exaggerate, but she didn't hold back either. This wasn't about personal feelings, this was about maintaining the integrity of the workplace. When she finished, Rebecca sat back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "I appreciate your honesty, Sophie. I'll look into this. You've shown a lot of strength in handling this situation yourself, but we don't tolerate toxic behavior here. I'll take care of it." Sophie nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had taken a risk, but it had been the right thing to do. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer the invisible, struggling woman she used to be. She was someone who could stand up for herself, and she wasn't going to let anyone push her down. The following week, things took a turn. Sophie arrived at the office one morning to find that David wasn't in. It wasn't unusual for him to be late, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Colleagues who usually kept to themselves seemed to be whispering, and a few of them avoided making eye contact with Sophie. She felt a nervous pang in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had too much to focus on now. By midday, Sophie received an unexpected call from Rebecca. The CEO's voice was calm, but there was an underlying seriousness to it. "Sophie," Rebecca said, "I wanted to let you know that David's position here has been reassessed. We've decided it's best for the company to make some changes. He will be leaving, effective immediately." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't even considered that it could go this far. "Leaving?" she repeated, trying to process the words. "You mean, he's being fired?" "Yes," Rebecca replied, her tone softening. "He's been given multiple chances to adjust, but his behavior has been disruptive to the team. I hope you understand that this decision wasn't made lightly, but it's in the best interest of the company." Sophie sat there, stunned. She couldn't believe it. She had never wanted this. She had simply wanted to be treated fairly, to earn her place based on her own merit. But now David was gone, and she was left to pick up the pieces. "I understand," Sophie said quietly, her voice shaky. "Thank you for letting me know." As she hung up the phone, Sophie felt a mixture of emotions flood her. Relief, for sure. She had never wanted to be the one to push David out, but she knew it was the right thing. His presence had been toxic. But there was also a part of her that felt guilty. Guilty that it had come to this, that things had escalated beyond what she had ever imagined. For the rest of the day, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that the office was watching her. No one knew exactly what had happened, but they all knew that Sophie had somehow managed to come out on top. Her promotion had been the catalyst, but now she had become the one in control. That evening, as Sophie packed up to leave, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lily, her daughter. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. I know you're doing great things." Sophie's heart swelled. Lily didn't fully understand the details of what had happened, but she knew enough to be proud. Sophie smiled to herself, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was finally on the right path. The next morning, as Sophie walked into the office, she took a deep breath. The weight of the past few weeks still lingered, but she was ready to face whatever came next. She had earned this, she had fought for this, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The days following David's departure were strange. The office felt different, almost too quiet, as if everyone was still processing what had happened. Sophie threw herself into her new role, taking charge of projects with a newfound confidence. But every now and then, she caught people watching her from the corners of their eyes. It wasn't hostility, it was curiosity. They were trying to figure out if she was really capable of handling the responsibility. Despite the uncertainty, Sophie thrived. She had earned the respect of the team by doing what she always did, working hard, staying focused, and proving that she wasn't just there because of a promotion. She was there because she deserved it. One afternoon, as Sophie was leaving for the day, she ran into Rebecca in the hallway. Rebecca stopped her with a smile. "Sophie, I just wanted to say thank you again for how you handled everything," she said. "I know it wasn't easy, but you've really stepped up in ways I didn't expect. The team's been responding well to your leadership." Sophie felt a warmth in her chest. "I'm just doing my job, but I appreciate your support." Rebecca nodded, looking thoughtful. "You know, when we offered you this promotion, we saw potential in you. What I didn't realize was how much drive you really had. You've proven yourself, and you've proven that you have the kind of leadership we need." Sophie smiled, a little overwhelmed by the praise. She had worked so hard for this, and it felt like the recognition was finally catching up with her. "Thank you," she said softly. As Sophie walked out of the building that evening, the weight she had carried for so long seemed a little lighter. The days of struggling, of being unseen, of fighting to be heard, they were behind her. She had fought for her place, not just in the company, but in her own life. That night, when Sophie arrived home, Lily was waiting for her, as always. Her little face lit up when she saw her mom. "How was your day, Mom?" Lily asked eagerly. Sophie knelt down to hug her daughter, feeling a surge of love. "It was good, sweetheart, really good." Lily smiled and wrapped her arms around her mom. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're the best." Tears stung Sophie's eyes as she held her daughter close. She had worked so hard, and there had been times when she wasn't sure if it was all worth it. But in that moment, as she looked at the child who had been her reason for everything, Sophie knew it had been. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, Sophie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could finally have the life she had always dreamed of. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more exciting content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and comment below. Your thoughts and feedback mean a lot. And if you think someone else would enjoy the story, be sure to share it with them. Your support helps us keep bringing you more amazing content. See you next time.